The lawyer read the sentence twice because nobody in that room believed it the first time. The orchard and the apiary pass to Wren Callahan, provided she is engaged to be married within 30 days of this reading. I watched Wren's knuckles go white around a folded tissue. Her uncle Desmond, 3 seats over, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I hadn't planned on saying anything. I'd only come because Vivian Callahan, the woman who'd just been buried on Tuesday, had kept my bee colonies fed and my invoices paid for 6 years, and I figured I owed her one last quiet afternoon in a stuffy office. Then Wren's eyes found mine across the room, desperate and a little wild, and before my brain caught up with my mouth, I stood up. "She is," I said, "engaged. To me." The lawyer blinked over his glasses. Desmond's chair creaked as he turned around fully, studying me like I was a stain he hadn't noticed on the carpet. Wren stared at me with an expression I couldn't read yet. Not gratitude, not quite panic, something tangled between the two. Nobody in that office knew my name was Caleb Ashworth, or that I kept 40 hives on the far ridge of her grandmother's land, or that I'd spent 6 years pretending not to notice the way Wren Callahan laughed with her whole chest when the harvest came in heavy. They only knew that a stranger in a canvas work jacket had just claimed to be marrying the heiress. The lawyer cleared his throat and asked when the engagement had happened. Wren answered before I could stumble. "Recently," she said, which was, technically, true down to the second. Desmond didn't buy it, not for a moment, and I watched calculation move behind his eyes like weather rolling over a field. He'd wanted that orchard sold to a development group out of Portland since the day his mother got sick, and a fake fiancé standing up in a will reading wasn't going to stop him from proving it fake. The lawyer, a careful man named Petrosian, informed us the estate required verification, a home visit within the month, evidence of a genuine relationship, before the transfer could be finalized. 30 days. I had 30 days to convince a stranger's estate attorney, a suspicious uncle, and possibly myself, that I was going to marry a woman who currently looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. We didn't speak until the parking lot, where Wren caught my sleeve before I reached my truck. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "I know," I said. "I did it anyway." She looked at me like she was recalculating something she'd assumed was settled a long time ago. Then she asked the question that would define the next month of my life. "Would you actually do it? Pretend, I mean. Just until the paper's clear." I should have said no. I had 40 hives depending on a stable schedule, a business that ran on early mornings and quiet fields, and absolutely no experience convincing anyone I was in love, mostly because I'd never had to fake it before. Instead, I said, "What's the going rate for a fiancé these days?" Her laugh came out wet and surprised, the first one I'd heard since the funeral, and something in my chest reorganized itself around the sound. Part 2. We agreed on rules before we agreed on anything else. No real declarations. No telling anyone at the hardware store or the co-op or her cousin's book club that it wasn't real. We would attend one dinner a week at her place so the story had texture, and I would move a few boxes of gear into the guest room so the address on file matched the story we were selling to Petrosian. 30 days. Then quietly and without drama, we'd call it off once the estate cleared and Desmond's lawyers stopped circling. It sounded simple on paper. Paper has never once accounted for how a person's laugh changes the shape of a kitchen. The first week, we were careful with each other in the specific way strangers are careful, tiptoeing around a lie we both knew was thin. She made coffee too strong on purpose because her grandmother always had. I fixed the latch on the honey house door because it had been sticking since spring. We built a routine out of small, unglamorous tasks. And somewhere in the second week, I stopped counting the days like a sentence and started noticing how she hummed while she labeled jars. It was on day 9 that I found the envelope. Wren had asked me to look through a box of Vivian's old apiary records for a supplier contact, and tucked between invoices was a letter addressed to nobody, dated the spring before she got sick. I wasn't supposed to read it. I read it anyway. Vivian had written that she'd watched Caleb Ashworth check on that orchard through every kind of weather for 6 years, and watched her granddaughter pretend not to notice him doing it, and that if either of them needed a nudge before life ran out of patience, she intended to leave one in her will. The clause wasn't an accident. It wasn't even really about the land. It was a woman who'd loved matchmaking more than she loved paperwork, engineering one last stubborn scheme from beyond the grave. My hands weren't steady when I set the letter down. I didn't tell Wren that night. I wasn't ready to hand her proof that the ground under both our feet had never been solid to begin with. Desmond didn't wait for proof of anything. By the second week, he'd hired an appraiser who kept finding reasons to walk the property with a clipboard, asking Wren-pointed questions about our first date, our anniversary, whether I'd met her mother. She improvised beautifully. I improvised badly, once claiming our first kiss happened at a diner that had closed 4 years earlier, and she had to step on my foot under the appraiser's clipboard to shut me up. Afterward, in the truck, she laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. "You're a terrible liar," she said. "I'm an excellent beekeeper," I said. "Nobody asked me to marry a hive." She looked at me sideways, still smiling, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with the will at all. Desmond escalated by proposing an engagement party, framed as a kind gesture to the family, actually engineered as a trap dressed in canapes. If we couldn't survive one evening of relatives asking real questions, the story would collapse in front of Petrosian and everyone else who mattered. Wren wanted to refuse. I told her refusing would look worse than showing up. So we showed up. Part 3. The party was held in the old orchard barn, strung with lights Wren's grandmother had bought a decade ago and never gotten around to using. Relatives I'd never met kept touching my arm like they were testing whether I was solid. Desmond watched from the punch table with the patience of a man who thought time was on his side. Wren stood close enough that our shoulders kept brushing, and every time they did, my pulse forgot the arrangement we'd agreed to. Then Grant walked in. Wren's whole posture changed before I even knew his name, shoulders squaring like she was bracing for weather. He was the ex who'd left 2 years earlier for a job in Denver, the one she'd mentioned exactly once, in a voice that closed the subject as fast as she opened it. He'd apparently heard about the will and the land, and decided a fake stranger claiming Wren's hand was reason enough to drive 6 hours uninvited. "Wren," he said, ignoring me entirely. "Can we talk?" She didn't move toward him. She reached, instead, for my hand, and laced her fingers through mine with a grip that told me this part, at least, wasn't performance. "Whatever you came to say," she told him, "you can say in front of my fiancé." The word landed strange in my chest, familiar and foreign at once. Grant didn't leave easily. He cornered her by the cider table, while I was pulled into a conversation with an aunt who wanted to know how many hives it took to pollinate 10 acres, and by the time I extracted myself, Wren's face had gone tight in a way I recognized from the will reading. I crossed the barn without deciding to. "Everything all right?" I asked, more edge in my voice than I meant to show. Grant looked me over, unimpressed. "This is between me and Wren." "Not anymore," I said, and I meant it in a way that had stopped being about 30 days or an appraiser's clipboard several nights earlier, somewhere between the coffee too strong and the latch that finally stopped sticking. Later, after the lights dimmed and the relatives thinned out, Wren found me by the honey house, arms crossed against the evening chill. "He wanted me to sell," she said. Said Desmond offered him a cut if he could talk me out of the engagement clause entirely. Convinced me love wasn't worth fighting for. Anger moved through me, sharp and unfamiliar. "And what did you tell him?" She looked at me for a long moment before she answered. "I told him I already knew what fighting for something looked like. I just didn't expect to learn it from a beekeeper." The space between us had been shrinking for 2 weeks without either of us naming it, and standing there under a sky gone the color of good honey, I stopped pretending I hadn't noticed. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the kind of gesture we'd rehearsed for Desmond's benefit a dozen times. Except this time, neither of us performed it for anyone watching. Ren, I said quietly, I need to tell you something your grandmother wrote. Her breath caught. What do you mean? I told her about the letter, about Vivian's handwriting slanting across the page, about a woman who'd apparently decided the two of us needed exactly one stubborn push. Ren went very still. She planned this, she said. The whole clause. It was never really about the land. I don't think it was, I said. Her eyes filled, not with the grief I expected, but with something closer to wonder. So none of this was random. She whispered, You standing up in that office? No, I admitted. I think some part of me had been waiting for a reason to. Part 4. The problem with almost saying the truth is that it leaves a door half open, and half-open doors let cold air in. Ren pulled back before I could finish the sentence I hadn't quite started. We should focus on Petrosian's visit, she said. Too fast, too careful, and the warmth from a minute earlier folded itself back into practicality. I let her have the retreat because pushing felt like something Desmond would do, not something I wanted to be. 3 days before the estate visit, Desmond played his last card. He mailed Petrosian an anonymous complaint claiming the engagement was fabricated for financial gain, complete with a photo of me moving boxes into the guest room the week the will was read, time-stamped like an accusation. Petrosian called an emergency meeting. Ren showed up pale and furious, certain the entire month had collapsed before it even had a chance to become real. If they think it's fake, she said in the truck, staring straight ahead, they'll give the land to Desmond, and it won't matter what either of us actually feels. The word actually hung between us like something she hadn't meant to release yet. What do you actually feel? I asked. She turned to look at me, and for once neither of us reached for a joke to survive the silence. I feel like I asked a man to pretend to love me, she said, and somewhere along the way I stopped being able to tell where the pretending ended. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with 30-day arrangements. Then let's stop pretending, I said. Right now? Before we walk into that office. Her breath shook. Caleb, if we tell Petrosian the truth, I don't mean tell him it was fake, I said. I mean stop treating what's true like it's still a performance. She stared at me, waiting, and I gave her the rest of it without hedging. I've watched you for 6 years, Ren. Long before your grandmother ever wrote that clause. I checked those hives in every kind of weather because it gave me a reason to see you laughing across a field I had no other claim to. This started as a favor. It stopped being won somewhere around the second cup of coffee that was too strong on purpose. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and I braced for the worst kind of silence. Then she reached across the seat and kissed me like she'd been waiting for permission to stop being careful. We walked into Petrosian's office holding hands that weren't rehearsed, and when he asked us to account for the photograph Desmond had sent, Ren answered without a single practiced line. He moved in because I asked him to stay, she said, because I was scared of losing the one thing my grandmother actually cared about, and somewhere in the middle of being scared, I fell for the man helping me carry it. Petrosian studied us both for a long, quiet moment, then set the complaint aside. Anonymous accusations aren't grounds to override a will, he said, particularly not when the two people involved seem more convincing than the man who sent it. Desmond, watching from the hallway, said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. The land was never going to be his, and somewhere in that stubborn 30-day scheme, his mother had made sure of it twice over. If you've ever pretended at something and caught yourself meaning it halfway through, you already know the exact moment I'm about to describe. Tell me your first name, your age, and the city or country you're watching from down in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know if any of you have a story like ours. The estate cleared 2 weeks later. Ren asked me to stay properly this time. No 30-day clock ticking down in the background. No clipboard-wielding appraiser testing our answers. I moved the rest of my gear out of the guest room and into the room beside it, because apparently sharing a bed felt like the honest version of the arrangement we'd built out of half-truths. We told people the real timeline eventually, and most of them laughed the way Wren had laughed in the truck that first afternoon, disbelieving and delighted in equal measure. Desmond stopped calling by midsummer. Grant never came back at all. Epilogue. 3 years later, the orchard produces more fruit than it has in a decade, mostly because 40 hives and a woman who refuses to let anything go to waste make an excellent partnership. We married the following spring, under the same lights her grandmother had strung and never gotten around to using, in the barn where Desmond once stood by the punch table waiting for us to fail. Wren wore her grandmother's ring, resized to fit, and cried through most of the vows, which she blamed entirely on pollen count. I didn't correct her. Sometimes, on slow mornings while I'm checking frames out on the ridge, Wren brings coffee too strong on purpose and stands beside me watching the bees work the clover. You know, she said last spring, Grandma once told me the whole orchard would fall apart without good pollination. She wasn't talking about the trees, I said. No, Wren agreed, leaning into my side. She really wasn't. We built something real out of 30 borrowed days and a letter I wasn't supposed to read. And if you ask either of us now where the pretending ended and the truth began, neither of us can point to the exact line anymore. Maybe that was the whole plan all along. What would you have done if you'd been asked to fake an engagement for 30 days and found yourself not wanting it to end? Have you ever had something start as a favor and turn into the realest thing in your life? Tell me your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.